What's up guys, before this video begins, make sure to subscribe if you enjoyed it so that way you don't miss other videos like this, and become a member to get videos early, daily video updates, and shoutouts in every video, which speaking of, shout out to our very first member, Bracket. So click on the join button to check out some of the perks. Anyway, enjoy. Bendy and the Ink Machine, another incredibly popular indie horror game throughout the past 5 years. If you guys are unaware, recently I've been making a ton of videos going over these incredible indie creations, and I think it's only fair to finally give Bendy its chance. We all know about this amazing game, however we need to take a step back and look at how this game rose all the way to the top, how the hype of it lasted for years, and even why it's beginning to fall, along with figuring out some potential content coming in the future. Anyway, we have a wild story with ups and downs, and the talks of a new sequel coming potentially this year. So let's take an outside approach and answer the question, what happened to Bendy and the Ink Machine? Well, the first thing to ask is, of course, what is Bendy and the Ink Machine? Well, I imagine you clicked on this video probably knowing what it is at least a little bit, so I won't go too deep, but to recap, Bendy and the Ink Machine is a horror puzzle game where the player named Henry enters his old animation studio, however with some major changes to the place. Because the sketchy underground building was abandoned, however the player is not alone in the studio. And the goal of the player is to travel around the studio, uncovering tons of different secrets about the company he worked for, and the secrets behind the main antagonists of the game, which are horrifying real-life versions of the cartoons the player originally helped create in the studio. This was very much a story-filled horror game that seemed to thrive in that aspect more than any other. A common criticism of this game that I agree with the most is the fact that the gameplay is a little bit stale and the puzzles and boss fights were quite a bit easy. But that didn't affect the success of the game at all, since most people were playing to discover the secret-filled, storyline-heavy vault hidden beneath the game's immediate surface. But let's go back to the beginning of its development and analyze its original growth. February 10th, 2017. This date marks the first significant step in Bendy and the Ink Machine's path to success, because this was when the very first chapter of the game was released. The original premise of this chapter, that could very well even be considered a demo, was a player going into an abandoned studio for the very first time, where they collect some artifacts that link to some of the old workers in the studio and use these to turn on the ink machine that at this stage was just a small one-room machine. Some weird suspenseful things would come along like jump scares and creepy rooms, but otherwise that was it for the original chapter. And with its main purpose being to set the player in the mood and environment for the future of the game, it's fair to say it did a really great job right out of the gate. With this game being bunched in with all the other big indie horror games, it also meant it shared the same story as to how it rose, being that explosive communities were immediately created after massive channels like Markiplier, Dan TDM, 8-Bit Ryan, and more with a cumulative subscriber count over 100 million covered the brand new title. The development of this phase included 4 more chapters, as well as multiple remasters of the original 3 chapters as development went up until the game finally got completed with Chapter 5 on October 26, 2018. This not only would mark the finish of Chapter 5, but also the release of Bendy as a full title, being uploaded to Steam for a $20 full purchase rather than the previous free demos seen before. This final version would combine all the chapters together for a long-awaited finale. From this point on, there will be some spoilers to the finale, just a warning. But anyway, what we got for the final scene, while somewhat confusing among the community, was still mind-blowing nonetheless. Because we were actually able to fight a horrifying monster-like version of Bendy, which would lead to an ending scene of us actually not inside of the studio for a change, but rather over at the original creator of Bendy and the main character's boss's house, Joey Drew, where he reflects on his dreams and ambitions he once had for the since fallen out animation team working behind the Bendy television series. The game, as mentioned before, admittedly had its fair share of problems that we had already talked about, but I think it's important to realize why this game rose among not just video games, but the whole YouTube scene in general. Because we have all seen tons of random games pop into your recommended from the previously mentioned mega channels, but this game stomped over even some of the largest titles of the time in player bases like Hello Neighbor and Tattletale. Well, in videos previous, I had made significant complaints about the horror game genre. Horror, unlike any other genre, touches into a whole new and unique sense not seen anywhere else, that sense being anxiety and fear. Whether it's jump scares, suspense, or a good mix of the two, the elements that horror brings to the table allow us for infinite creative freedom that, unfortunately, is almost never used. And oftentimes, whether it's movies or games, cliches completely dominate the mainstream market. But what Bendy did completely different about this was keeping the super popular premise used in cliche genres of monsters, jump scares, abandoned buildings, and the feeling of being watched. However, this game takes full advantage of the creative freedom given in the genre and managed to successfully mix the style of a friendly funny early 1900s black and white cartoon with a horrifying twist around it. However, this all would be meaningless and sort of gimmicky if it wasn't for the absolutely terrific story. I believe what personally made this story so amazing was the fact that it was as simple or as complicated as you wanted it to be. I mean, without any deeper digging, you could play through the game just once and figure out that the ink machine is what's creating all these monstrosities attacking you that originated from the original cast of the show, or you could dig deeper and deeper to just constantly have altering views about the whole purpose of the ink machine. Hell, this is one of the only games to somewhat completely stump game theory. I mean, sure, he figured out massive parts of the lore, and it's very arguable that the team intentionally changed things after seeing his videos to add new twists, but he was having trouble determining whether the ending was a positive ending, a negative one, or many other different scenarios. But enough about this game and its success, because while the game itself released among one of the greatest, if not the greatest horror game of 2017 according to IGN, there needed to be a new direction for the title after this. A major criticism I get in my videos commonly, especially about single-player games, is the argument that a single-player game is significantly harder to keep alive because it's not built to be replayable and it's meant to be put down after a certain time. And while I surely agree, there needs to be a new direction to go in order for the game to keep relevant. Some examples of games that have been popular forever: the God of War series, Resident Evil series, Mario series, and tons of other different games reinvented their style or story in order to keep the game relevant for years in the future. Now that we know about the success of the original game, let's talk about the direction it went afterwards. Well, up until this point, the Bendy game had accumulated immense amounts of fame and support, as many other games do. And what better way to add on to the hype of this game than to make a fully new title in the series? Well, this is exactly what came next for the title, as honestly expected. On June 24th, 2019, around a year after Bendy's full release, we saw the unveiling of a second game for Bendy called Bendy and the Dark Revival after a small little announcement tease for it February of the same year. This trailer showed us a new look into what could be coming soon for the title. How soon exactly? Well, according to the trailer, fall of 2019 is when the game was supposed to be released. But the Bendy team was quite small, and as exciting as it is to see another full game come out just a little bit after the success of the original title, it also was a little bit too good to be true, and as fall came, it left. And there was no new game that came out. Not to mention, announcements were very minimal, with tons of questions coming from the fans. Did the developers forget about Bendy and the Dark Revival? Well, early 2020 came around, and there were a couple statements by the devs. One being a video called "The Reason Why Bendy and the Dark Revival is Taking So Long," where they justify the length of this project, where they explain it will release as a full game rather than have updates to one version. And we also got a second trailer for this game where we find out the game got moved to a 2020 release. And behold, come early 2020, we officially got our hands on the brand new Bendy game, alas. Oh, no, not Bendy and the Dark Revival, silly. Boris and the Dark Return. I'm sorry, but what? Anyway, jokes aside, on February 5th, 2020, Boris and the Dark Return was released to keep fans interested in the title for a little bit longer while they kept working on the delayed second title. There was a major perspective change this time, with a third-person view of the main character, who this time is Boris, one of the actual ink creations seen inside of the game. Anyway, while this game didn't do nearly as well among the YouTube community as others, it's safe to say that they were more or less aiming just to keep the diehard fanbase pleased among the increasing delay for the full-blown second title coming soon. And just based off of how many people are still passionate about this game, I would argue that it worked pretty well. But there's only one issue, one major problem that is turning this potential hit second release into more like a potential disaster, which is the consistent unfulfilled promises about this game. No, I'm not talking about their fake Battle Royale April Fool's prank that they pretty much just ripped off of Hello Neighbor completely. I'm talking about more or less the fact that, once again, Bendy and the Dark Revival is just up in the air. 2020 came and went just like how 2019 did, and in that same fashion, we got nothing regarding this brand new title that has been hyped up for, at this point, years. Now, why is this a problem? Well, there's of course the issue with the fact that words slowly lose weight over time when there's nothing to back them up. And rather than excitement being built up over time as the release date gets closer, more and more people are just being left scratching their heads wondering what they have been waiting for. But then there's a potential deeper issue, which could be a loss of passion from the game devs. The dev team for Bendy is remarkably small considering how much they do, and I don't necessarily believe that the couple of years in between the titles is that long considering their small size. But what concerns me is the fact that they believe believed that the game was going to release so much earlier than it has. What this personally tells me is that the game was lined up to be released incredibly fast to keep up with the game's hype, kind of like what Scott Cawthon did with the first few FNAF games. However, for whatever reason, they overestimated how long it would take to finish. And with this game being a year and a half late already, I'm really beginning to fear the possibility of this game being either delayed further or having it come out lazy and uninspired and just a jumbled mess. Because as this date is being pulled back further and further, I'm beginning to fear that the developers aren't necessarily overwhelmed with how much they planned on adding, but they could potentially be losing their passion for the game, especially considering the support for Bendy and the Ink Machine is slowly dying down due to natural decay. You could argue that before in 2019 they planned on the game releasing chapter by chapter, and that's how they planned on getting it out so fast, but even then they planned on having the whole entire game done by 2020, and we're already in the 5th month of 2021. If anyone with any authority to Bendy is watching this, I think it's really important to realize that this game held up among all the other 2017 hits way better, and that there's no real reason to rush out release dates that you're not going to fulfill, since I'm pretty sure no matter what, there's always going to be a die-hard audience for this title. Hell, an unrelated Fortnite skin came out that just resembled the Bendy and the Ink Machine art style, and it was trending on Twitter because of it, so it's safe to say there's still a passionate fan base. Otherwise, we are up to date with Bendy and the Ink Machine as of now. We do of course know that a sequel is expected to come out, and we could expect that incredibly soon, but otherwise the game itself is more or less on hold for now. And with a massive audience waiting around for the next big change to happen to the series, I think to answer the question of what happened to Bendy and the Ink Machine, the game used the incredible underestimated power of YouTube to shoot itself into mainstream light, but as fans wait years patiently for a new release, nowadays it's becoming shakier as to what the devs have been up to and to what their plans are with this brand new series. Anyway guys, like I said, if you enjoyed, make sure to like and subscribe. You made it to the end of the video, so comment egg to confuse the people who are still watching. Anyway, peace out.